Hey guys, this is Jeff Stanek with Figured Out Baseball. We've got a great Figured Out Baseball podcast for you today, one that I'm very, very excited about. This particular podcast is in our series that we call the Real Dirt podcasts, where we get our hands dirty, talking about one particular topic for about a half hour, give or take, one very specific topic with a very qualified person. That way, hopefully anybody that has interest in that one topic or area, hopefully we sort of exhaust everything that you would want to know or want to hear in that area or on that particular topic. Today, we're lucky enough to be joined by Rodolfo Martinez. He is one of our contributors to Figured Out Baseball. So if you go to the Figured Out Baseball website, you'll find video from Rodolfo, which is truly, truly excellent video, which I think you can learn a lot from and get a lot better at a lot of different things, particularly on the throwing side of things or, with arm health. I'll give you a background for Rodolfo before we jump into questions with him. He is originally from Hackensack, New Jersey. He graduated in 2017 from Pitt with a degree in athletic training. While at Pitt, he also worked as a student athletic trainer for several sports, and also worked with another college and a high school in the area as well during that time. In 2018, he graduated with a master's degree in kinesiology from Florida International University. During that time, he also earned his certification in athletic training. In March of 2019, he was hired as a full-time athletic trainer for the FIU baseball team. And I know that from talking with Rodolfo in the past, he's worked with baseball, but baseball is also a passion for him, and you'll see that as we get a little bit further into this bio. December 2020, he was hired. He left Florida International and was hired to be an athletic trainer for the Louisiana Air National Guard, which I think is kind of a really cool thing to get into. Shortly after doing that, he opened his own business. He is the creator of a business that he calls La Gasolinera, PT, physical therapy. The website is lagasolinerapt.com. And on the website, basically, he provides custom training solutions for overhead athletes, some of those being baseball players. And sort of a mantra on that website is conquer pain, enhance performance, throw gas. Thus, the title of the website, the title of the business. So Rodolfo again is a contributor to FiguredOutBaseball.com. This is our first podcast, but I believe that we are probably going to schedule another podcast after this. If you listen to Figured Out Baseball podcasts often, I hope that you'll check out our podcasts on other platforms. You can find Figured Out Baseball podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, as well as podcasts and YouTube and videos on YouTube on our Figured Out Baseball channel. So we're trying to put our content out there as much as possible. But without any further delay, I'd like to welcome Rodolfo to the podcast. Rodolfo, I'm very, very excited to get into this one with you.
Jeff, thank you so much, and same here. Very excited to dig into this, and it's a pleasure to be doing this.
Sort of by chance, but maybe it's a good fit. Today's podcast is brought to you by Crossover Symmetry and armcare.com. So Rodolfo, the name of our podcast today in the Real Dirt series is Injury Prevention. I know that's something that is a passion for you, and for overhand athletes, it's something that is certainly it's a pretty hot topic. It's something that I think not enough people probably pay attention to, especially at the youth training levels. But can you tell us why, in particular, this is something that is a passion for you and something that you would like to spend the next 25 minutes talking about?
I mean, again, as you alluded to, I think arm injuries, are such a problem in any sort of overhead sport. And realistically, that's just because throwing a ball, whatever implement you're doing, whether it's baseball, or softball, or football, is stressful on the body. It's going to be stressful on the body. Same thing as a lot of other activities are, in the athletics world. So realistically, I love working with overhead athletes just because it's such a customized and tailored solution. Realistically, it's about forming that relationship, forming that bond. And through that bond, you can come to discoveries together. Everyone's throwing mechanics are different. Everyone's routines are different. What they want to train for is different. So I love just really digging into the nitty gritty and finding the right solutions, for certain athletes, however it fits into their schedule, however it fits into their sport, whatever it may be.
Can you kind of tell me some of the most important aspects of injury prevention, whether that be, things that you like. Do you like a lot of band work? Do you like do you think a certain amount of throwing is the most important thing? Like, I know there are guys on social media that I trust, that I think are really good, that basically promote a lot of throwing, and kind of the more that you throw, the healthier your arm will be. Do you think that it starts with weight training? Do you think weighted balls or plyo balls are a part of it? Can you just kind of talk about some of the things that you think are the most important, generally speaking? Like, you should pay a lot of attention and spend a lot of time doing this or that. Other things that maybe mobility. I don't know what it is, but do you have particular things that you believe are sort of the first and most important things to pay attention to when it comes to injury prevention, or does that individualize as well?
Yeah, before digging into anything like that you mentioned, I think the most important thing is you have to be really cognizant of how your body feels. You have to be really in tune with your body and really monitor all of the training you're doing on different ends of the spectrum, whether it's in the weight room, whether it's on the playing field, whether it's bands or whatever it may be. Realistically, treat your body almost as a science experiment. You're adding a variable in, whether it's weighted ball training, whether it's plyo balls, whatever it may be, and then seeing what the effects are, seeing the results. Does it make your arm sore, or does it make you throw harder? Are you noticing that you have better velo, better commands? Obviously these things are going to be things that take time, but you really do have to treat your body like that science experiment and see what works for you. So I think all of these things are different components to the puzzle, and they're different tools, that we can use in order to, like you mentioned before, improve your performance and then also keep your arm healthy. That's realistically all I'm trying to do with my website, with La Gasolinera PT, trying to give athletes the resources that they need to find that customized solution for them. So I think you touched upon a lot of great topics. Obviously your weight training plays a huge part of that. And within the weight training is not just, like strengthening type exercises. When we think of training that's in the weight room, we think of your dumbbell press, we think of, exercises for these, big muscles. Realistically, training in the weight room can also include explosive things with med balls, plyometric type actions, different things like that. So weight training is going to be a huge component of the puzzle. Beyond that, it's going to be, how you're throwing, like what you're actually doing when you throw. So some people, like you said, respond better to throwing every day, and these are the people that may get a little shorter of a programmed rest period in their total year-long season. But there are also people that, that need their rest periods, that maybe can't long toss as much as they'd like. There are people that do really well with plyo balls and weighted balls, and there are certain people that don't. I think everything has its risks and its benefits, and you just have to see what the right solution for you is. I think ideally some of the key components that we want to hit is that you want to be doing something in the weight room year-round, so obviously this will change depending on the demands of your season, but you do want to be doing something in the weight room year-round. You do want to be doing some sort of mobility work, even if it's relatively light, even if you tend to be naturally loose and don't need to do all that much mobility work. I think some mobility work is definitely a piece of the puzzle. Obviously, making sure your mechanics are okay, that's going to be super individualized, so it's hard to get into without seeing anything. But in addition to that, kind of like you mentioned, that workload management, making sure you're not throwing too much throughout the year. You do need those rest periods at the end of the day, even if it's short, even if you're someone that their arm does better with a little bit of shorter rest periods. But workload management is going to be a big one, throughout the season, but then also throughout the year, making sure that you're limiting the amount of stress on your body. So It's definitely a tough question to answer, so I'm really grateful we're doing a Real Dirt podcast just so we can get a little bit into the nitty gritty. But yeah, it's a very multifaceted answer here.
Yeah, and we may get to the 30-minute mark here, Rodolfo, and decide that we need to record a second one of these because they're just too much to cover in a 30-minute period. And obviously, you're not dealing with an individual here. We're talking general, which I know can be difficult for something like this. But I just think that it's important. I guess what I like to do with these podcasts is sort of give young players and their coaches maybe even the right questions to answer, the right questions to ask whoever they're working with, their pitching coach or, a physical therapist or whoever they're working with, and maybe just kind of give them some tools or some general knowledge that can be useful for them down the line. So one of the things that you just said that I kind of want to touch on next is you've got to be sort of in tune with how your body feels. Just say, for example, I've never thrown with a weighted ball before. First time I throw with the weighted ball, or like the first day on a weighted ball program, I imagine that I'm going to have some soreness, some unusual soreness the next day because I've done something different. How long of a period do I kind of give it? Like you sort of said, you can try some different things and see sort of what works for you, but at the same time, I know that, overdoing it, or for some people, like something maybe more beneficial than others. If I'm going to try something new, like if I'm going to try a new mobility program, or I'm going to try a new weighted ball program, how much soreness or should I expect to be normal, or should I sort of be okay with before I say, you know what, this isn't working, I've got to move to something else? Or like, how should I give this a certain period of time? Should I ease into it very slowly and see if I see some progress, and if I don't, then stop and go to something different? Like, how exactly do you know if what you're doing is working, or if something you're doing is sort of leading you down a road to injury, or if something you're working on just needs to be given a little more time for your body to adapt to it because it's new? Again, I know maybe a very difficult question to ask because it's kind of general, and a lot to it, but like as you sort of were answering that last question, that was one question I had, is if I'm trying something new, how long do I give it before I really know whether or not it's working or not? And if I'm having some, immediate soreness, like how do I know if this is good or bad? Like, do I keep going with it, or do I shut it down and move on from it because it's probably not good for my body? Is that a fair question to ask?
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, I think it's one of the most important questions to ask, especially as you go about this science experiment of tinkering your training and seeing what works best for you. I think, and this is something I learned, being an athletic trainer for the baseball team over at FIU, I think it's important to understand the distinction between pain and soreness. Ultimately, you never want to be throwing in pain. The difference, or at least how I explain it, we think of pain as usually being pretty pinpoint, pretty localized to a certain area. If you have any sort of pain anywhere, could be inside of your elbow, could be anywhere else on the body. I know that's obviously the big concern for baseball players, but could be anywhere. If you do have that pinpoint pain, then usually it indicates that you may be overdoing it a little bit. This may not be right for you. So if you're having that type of pain, then this stress may not be right for you. However, soreness usually is a little more diffuse throughout the body, is usually a little more spread out. And you're definitely going to experience soreness as you add new things in. As you try out different activities, this is something that you haven't done before. So ultimately, your muscles and your joints are going to be exposed to a training stimulus that they haven't before, and they're going to have to adapt. That's how ultimately the body makes improvements. So understanding that pain and soreness distinction is important. In terms of time frame, these changes can take a while to really develop. So I would really advise patience with the process. I think anywhere between 4 to 8 weeks is a reasonable time frame to expect some sort of change. It might be minor, but ultimately this is what you're looking for. Stick with it for those 4 to 8 weeks, see how it develops. If it is improving your performance, then hey, you're on the right path. Keep digging. Keep searching within this area, within this training that you're now incorporating. with that, obviously you want to be cautious of any of those episodes of pain or anything like that, like I mentioned earlier. But that 4 to 8 week time frame is usually a pretty good sweet spot to shoot for. It may sound like a long period of time, but ultimately when you realize over the course of your career that this is just a small blip on the radar, it's important to really understand how to be patient with your training process and realize that all of these improvements are going to take time. So don't expect quick changes, and stick with things for a little while to see if they give you that change.
I'm glad you said that about just kind of giving it some time. This is a long time ago, but I can recall it was one of my first years ever coaching. I spent some time at home with my parents' home during the summer. Not maybe a month or so, something like that. But for the time being, I thought I would give some lessons to make a little bit of money while I was home, a little bit extra money. So I gave lessons to one kid sort of from my area. He got a lesson. One day he came over for a hitting lesson, and then he went to his game that night and didn't see. I think he might have went 0 for 4 or something like that. And I talked to him about getting another lesson, and his dad was like, "Well, it didn't help. He went 0 for 4, and then never came back again." I was like, "Are you kidding me? Like one lesson, you think the kid's going to get 4 hits?" But anyway, another story altogether. But okay, so Rodolfo, if I'm inputting something new, especially in a throwing program, right? Is there an optimal time of the year to do this? So we'll go by like a high school or a college athlete. Most college athletes are playing in the summer, in summer ball, as are high school athletes. So you have your primary season through the spring and summer. You have a fall season, which a lot of most colleges have fall seasons. High school players, some do, some don't. Some guys play football or whatever, maybe take some time off. And you have your winter, I think for everyone is sort of quote unquote the off season, if there is one. Is there a better time than others to implement some of this stuff? A better or a worse time? And I guess I'm thinking I
think it's going to depend on different people, whatever works for you and whatever works for your personal habits. I mean, I kind of look to the calendar week, for example. Technically our calendar week starts on Sunday, but for me, in my mind, it makes more sense to start it on Monday. So that's how I kind of mentally block out my week. I think the two periods that are going to benefit baseball players the most to think about starting to make these changes and start to think about how they're going to organize their year are the two major periods of downtime. So obviously, like you said, a lot of athletes are playing through the summer, but usually you have maybe a couple of weeks at the end of the summer, after summer ball stops and before fall ball starts. So usually that period of downtime may be a good one to think about your calendar year and how you want to organize your training, any sort of additional things you may want to add in. Or there's also that period in December, like you talked about, right before the season starts, that period of time off that baseball players have. Obviously, that one is going to be a little more complicated because you have the holidays and whatnot. Usually people are busy with their families and different things. And, maybe you're thinking about baseball a ton. Maybe you just want to, eat a lot of turkey and ham. But I think looking at those two periods are important. I think for me personally, I would prefer that summer period just because it's not right before the season. I don't think – as you go into the season, I wouldn't necessarily tinker with it a ton. Just for me personally, you may stumble upon something great and it really may, unlock your performance and you have a great year where you just shove or you rake. But realistically, there's also the potential to have something like this where you find a piece of training that, again, maybe isn't right for you. And you'll have to change gears and shift accordingly. I don't necessarily like doing that right before the year, so that's why I, again, gravitate towards that summer period. But realistically, it's whatever works best for you. I think it is just important to think about, your calendar year in terms of your competitive season, whether that's, what your traditional season in the spring or, thinking about your summer ball season, whatever it may be. I think it's important to just think about your training like holistically and really have a plan for how it's going to go. Like what you're going to do in the weight room, what you're going to throw, what arm care stuff you're going to be doing. Again, it's just such a multifactorial puzzle that I think you need to sit down and kind of plan it out and adjust where you need to. But I think having that plan is super important.
Is it safe, Rodolfo, to either start or continue, maybe there are different answers to both, start or continue weighted ball programs during the season? And I'll just kind of say this. There's a former player of mine who was in the Marlins organization who had great stuff, could really pitch, but they felt like he didn't have the velocity he needed to be successful to be a big league pitcher. So there was one spring training where basically they held him out of competition for like 2 months, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever it was, to go on a weighted ball program. They wanted him to do that before he started competing. Is it safe for a high school athlete who maybe doesn't have like a super regimented program, maybe is pitching for more than one team, so their outings are not like really, really regimented? Like, for example, they're going to pitch today and have 5 or 6 days off before they pitch again, or before they start another game. Is it safe for guys to start weighted ball programs, anytime during the season? And I want to talk about weighted ball specifically because I know that velocity is king, and I know that weighted balls are how a lot of people out there, that's how that is kind of the, I guess, the most efficient route is for, according to most people, about how to gain velocity pretty quickly, which in the recruiting world is pretty darn important to gain velocity. Is that safe to do during the season, or particularly with weighted balls, would you have a little bit of a different answer to that last question as far as maybe waiting until outside of competition season?
I mean, ultimately, like the way I see it, it's a calculated risk. Like there is a chance that weighted balls might not be right for you. There is a chance that you may get injured throwing weighted balls, but ultimately they do have that benefit as well. Like they could really improve your velocity. It could be a training method that really works for you. So, it's going to be a calculated risk. If you want to do it, like as you said, like in season and really get after it in season to hopefully, improve your performance and really have a great year. I think that you can, but I think ultimately you have to be ready for the consequences as well. And go into it with that calculated risk mentality. And again, be super, super in tune with how your body feels and check in with yourself. Make sure that this is still something that works for you. I think weighted balls in particular are interesting because, again, they're super powerful in terms of like a training tool and to improve your performance, but they can also not necessarily be dangerous, but it could just not be right for you. It couldn't necessarily do it. It doesn't necessarily mean it could do something for you. So I think realistically, you just have to be ready for both ends of that coin. With weighted balls, again, in particular, I think it would be ignorant to shy away from that potential there. So if you are someone kind of like you're describing that is a little bit on the cusp, yeah, weighted balls might be worth it. Like it may be worth it to just go for it because you don't necessarily have anything to lose. If you're not necessarily getting recruited, if a lot of, coaches are kind of passing you by because you have so-so stuff, then yeah, give weighted balls a shot. Like at that point you kind of have nothing to lose. So you might as well give it a shot because you can see some powerful benefits like we were talking about.
There's a lot of different areas to go to from here. There's no way in the world we're going to finish up all the notes I have written down in the next 5 minutes. So I might have to ask you if this can be part one of what ends up being a multi-part Real Dirt podcast series, which I've never done a multi-part Real Dirt series before, but if we're ever going to start, this seems like one of the most important ones.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm open to it. I'd like to apologize because I know sometimes I can get long-winded, but ultimately, like, it's because I'm passionate about it and because all of this stuff is so individual, so you really have to tinker with it and see how it works for you. So there's a lot of stuff to dig into here.
Yeah. let's stick with weighted balls. I have several places I can go to from here, but let's stick with weighted balls just for a minute. Are weighted, and by the way, Rodolfo has some really great videos on the Figured Out Baseball website on weighted balls and how we'll just kind of you'll have to check them out for yourself, but you can check out Rodolfo's weighted ball videos on the Figured Out Baseball website at figuredoutbaseball.com. Are weighted balls, Rodolfo, is that something that should that be sort of a seasonal thing, or something that players are sort of implementing all year round as they're throwing? Is that something you should do sort of in a couple different segmented, 4 to 8 week periods or whatever throughout the year, or something that they should be doing if they're throwing 9 months out of the year? Should weighted balls be a part of their programs for 7, 8, or all 9 months of how often they're throwing?
I think that, again, there's a lot of ways to break it up. I think the answer, if weighted balls are right for you, I think the answer kind of lies in the middle. I think you should be, if you are doing weighted balls, I think it should be longer than just one 4 to 8 week period, or even a couple 4 to 8 week periods sprinkled in throughout the year, throughout the calendar year. But I think I'm not necessarily sure it should be something that's done year round. I think all training at the end of the day is going to have peaks and valleys. It's going to have ebbs and flows. That goes for everything. As your your training year progresses, as you ramp up with more in-season type stuff, then obviously your work in the weight room is going to slow down a bit. I think weighted balls are kind of the same way. So if you're in more of an off-season period, and you don't really need to ramp up all that suddenly, I think weighted balls, it's not necessarily appropriate at that time. I think it matters, being intentional here and really thinking about what you're doing, what your goals are. Obviously, weighted balls can have powerful effects, but there's no reason to be ramping up if you don't need to. And especially early on, when you're first, coming back from a period of rest where you haven't been throwing for a while and you're just getting the arm moving again, I think implementing weighted balls at that point would be kind of counterproductive. You're not really ramping up for anything, so why are you trying to incorporate the weighted balls? So I think it should be more than just those 4 to 8 week stints, but I don't think it should be the full year either.
So a person who, a standard high school player who starts playing somewhere in February or March and plays through the summer, who goes to sort of an off-season weighted ball program in November when they haven't necessarily been throwing much, and I know that this occurs in my area, something like that does not sound like it fits what you would suggest. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, I think in this particular example, November is just a little bit too early. I would be looking at more at December, maybe January, and then continuing it through the season. When you start the season, obviously baseball seasons are some of the longest seasons there are in sports. So if you're trying to come out the gate guns blazing, I think by the midway point, for big leaguers, by that All-Star break, you're going to gas out a little bit. So I think starting in that December, January timeframe, where you started to get maybe a couple of periods, a couple of those 4 to 8 week blocks before the season actually gets started, and then going through the season, I think that's a little bit more advantageous.
Today's podcast, again, is brought to you by Crossover Symmetry and armcare.com. For baseball players, if you want to increase velocity without losing command or throw runners out from anywhere in the field, check out armcare.com. Developed by Crossover Symmetry, armcare.com measures your arm strength and delivers customized prep, strength, and recovery training based off of what you need most that day. Gain velocity through targeted training while also having your best stuff every game. Armcare.com is used at every level of baseball players who want an advantage over their competition and take their health and performance seriously. Go to armcare.com and get started today. Again, sort of maybe a good coincidence that armcare.com is sponsoring today's podcast. But Rodolfo, we're about at our 30-minute mark, and I still have several major areas of this that we hadn't even gotten into. So I do hope that we can have a part 2 to this Real Dirt podcast, because we really, while we talked about some aspects of injury prevention, I didn't even get to ask you some basic questions like, what are some of the biggest contributors that you've seen to injuries, or, how the things that people can be doing in the weight room that, could be contributing to injuries that people may not think about, because maybe they're on a football specific lifting program or a bodybuilding type of lifting program instead of something baseball specific. So those are some teasers that we can get into in the next time that we record. But Rodolfo, I really appreciate your time today, and this half hour went by very, very fast for me, but it was really good stuff.
Absolutely, same here. I'm looking forward to our second part to this, because there's definitely a lot more that goes into this. So I'm looking forward to diving into it some more and helping out some people, whatever piece of the puzzle it is, whatever works for them.
Whatever your favorite medium is to listen to Figured Out Baseball podcast, I hope you'll check back here soon for part 2 of our Real Dirt series with Rodolfo Martinez that we're calling Injury Prevention. Today, again, was part 1. Check out part 2 that'll be coming to you very soon.